Welcome to an audiobook entitled Parish Management and Operations. The Buck Stops Here. Narrated by Catholic author Michael Brinda. We hope you enjoy the segment and find it useful in your ministerial work.
Chapter 32. What hats are on your hat rack? Instead of discovering this ongoing VW charade, what does the broken carb culture essentially force carb personnel to do? These culture-deficient so-called management minds conspired with other bureaucratic minds to return people to spending years toiling in their very comfortable gulag of a testing lab, trying to figure out what could have been discovered in relative minutes by simply mentally switching from wearing their bureaucratic administrator hat to an entrepreneurial thinker labeled hat. Carb upper management should darn well have had this hat hanging on their hat rack and chose to wear it, by doing so subsequently viewing the issue at hand through a different solution lens. This figurative hat switching would be enabled and animated by working within the correct culture. And if you detect some passion here, chalk that up to the fact that my family and I live in California, and we have all been breathing this additional pollution for years. I am willing to opine you could ask every single person in upper management supposedly guiding CARB to bring us citizens to clean air nirvana, are you culturally entrepreneurial in your approach to problem solving? And you are going to receive a deer-in-the-headlights look. Why? Because CARB did not have folks willing to operate while wearing the culturally entrepreneurial thinker hat. The CARB bureaucratic leadership was mentally lopsided, improperly constituted, and demonstrably useless in advising under certain crucial hats germane to the very core reasons their agency exists to protect the public. In other words, owning and wearing but a single hat on your PMO administrator hat rack is not going to work for you. I am willing to further state there was at least one person working in the lab who at a gut level felt the above, but because of the culture, there's that word again, within their organization, the culture was not correct, and they were afraid to speak their mind to those above them on the CARB org chart for fear of getting put in their place or getting their head chopped off. So instead, they stayed within the safe zone as their broken culture prescribes and said nothing. The above illustrates why military coups d'etat are often led by colonels and other lower ranks, but not by generals. Why? Because the generals no longer see, or at least no longer care to see, what is broken when they maintain their status quo and live comfortably, but the younger colonel walks with the eyes wide open and is willing to take the necessary action to improve a broken situation. Thus, we have an environment where the collective mental horsepower of an entire organization is defeated simply by an incorrect, incoherent, and broken culture steering management personnel. And do you want to know the absolute worst part of this VW story? I know John Smith, the CARB spokesperson, and he knows me, because he purchased computer training from New Horizons computer learning centers over many years, which means John Smith could have asked himself, who do I have in my personal contact list who knows a deep thing or two about computer technology? Perhaps the founder of New Horizons, the place where I send our employees to be trained, where they use computer technology. Yeah, I'll call him and run these odd circumstances by him. See if he has any thoughts, ideas, or suggestions about this deep VW mystery. Did John Smith make that call? No. Why? Because either that thought never crossed his mind, or if it did, he was afraid of the consequences of reaching outside his organization for advice and help. Why? Because instead of switching hats, which is to say switch the lens through which he viewed a problem or situation, as would not only be enabled by, but demanded by, working within a correct culture, John chose to wear the one and only, safe and secure, hat enshrined on his culture rack. That hat labeled, "I'm a spokesperson only. That's my job. I don't have any other way of viewing or thinking about what is in front of me, because never in my life did I have the good fortune to work someplace where this more expansive way of speaking and thinking was animated by a correct culture and allowed to become our expected behavioral norm." Carry forward what a correct culture-enabled simple hat switch made by just one person might have meant. Because we are dealing with a camouflaged 40 times increase in diesel fuel emissions, people breathing in this pollution may have contracted various respiratory ailments or forms of cancer and died, all because an entire gang of people did not switch hats and think outside their parochial little box worlds. Why? Altogether now, a broken and corrupted culture. If you find yourself not agreeing with this expansion of the article as I just described it, pause long and hard here, because if you think you are, for whatever reasons, emotional, intellectual, philosophical, etc., going to behave like John Smith when working as the chief PMO administrator, you are in the wrong box on the PMO org chart. Further note, the usefulness available to the VW CEO from the collective power of the minds of the VW board members, in other words, minds that reside higher up on the org chart to assist those below, was soundly defeated because they were given the mushroom treatment. You are familiar with the administrative principle of treating people like mushrooms? And pray tell, what is the function of a board, or in our PMO world, the pastor or parish council, if not to prevent such train wrecks from occurring in the first place? But people higher up on the org chart will never be of any help when they too operate under a broken culture. They just become extended window dressing, their existence demanded by adherence to proper protocol as dictated by corporate or canon bylaws. But functionally speaking, they are a useless gathering of culturally silenced minds. And if you are asking here, how could the board have known about this issue? Look no further than the VW CEO, who never informed them of the millions of cars under scrutiny for emissions anomalies. If properly informed, do you think at least one VW board member might have ventured, what emissions anomalies are you talking about? But the correct culture that would have enabled and animated such a conversation did not exist. Imagine that. No fuel, no fire. The upshot? If you want the collective thinking power of the various parish councils and other advisors to be of service to you, you have to not only keep them informed, they must operate within the riverbanks of the correct PMO culture. If the above sounds in any way too harsh for you to implement exactly as it was explained, or if the above is not something that can be derived from and supported by your current parish mission statement, I invite you to start writing something other than the sample statement of culture that is just as effective or even more effective in setting your mind to creating the proper PMO culture, but is worded to your personal liking. Note, however, you do need a written statement of culture. Why? Keep listening. Chapter 33. Either you choose the culture or the culture chooses you. A quote by Peter Drucker. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. End quote. What has been written above in the example statements on culture are neither too harsh nor too soft, as the words themselves only convey the culture but do not specifically articulate the manner in which you achieve what the words state when installing the culture and holding all personnel accountable to what the words mean. However, note, no matter how culture is approached, at all times some form of culture exists in any organization. Therefore, in the absence of any such statement articulating precisely what the PMO culture is going to be where you work, will any culture exist at all? Oh my, yes, absolutely. A culture of some sort always exists because you either choose the culture or some culture by default will choose you. But what culture by default will you have without any deliberate written statement of culture informing and animating PMO behavior? Precisely this culture. Just using simple numbers, if you have 5 paid personnel and 10 volunteers working in PMO, you will have the amalgamated sum of their 15 different disparate, most likely conflicting, individual attitudes, subject matter knowledge, methods of operation, and subsequent uneven job performances derived thereby as your culture. Now, isn't that just a lovely way to build PMO's foundational culture? Said no one ever. What kind of a Frankenstein operation are you managing, or think you are managing, with a mixed culture created like this? How can you possibly know with full certainty what level of service parishioners are receiving from those who report to you when 15 different people define for themselves in 15 different degrees and ways what, for example, a simple but profound cornerstone expression such as level of parishioner service actually means? Who in their right mind would allow their PMO culture to not only be guided by, but be variably reset each transaction of every day by the collective whims of an essentially random and ever-changing number of self-guiding, self-monitoring, self-grading employees and volunteers? This is a culture of omission and neglect. Why? Because there is no such thing as no culture. Some culture always exists, and this potpourri, this is the culture that will exist in any organization when you ignore creating the correct culture. Chapter 34. The Consequences of Wearing the Wrong Hat. The most common reason you may perceive taking the necessary steps to kill and replace a broken culture as being too harsh, especially in the inherited broken culture with established friendships, pre-existing relationships, historically low to non-existent job performance expectations, etc., is very often rooted in the corrupted perspective of the PMO administrator charged with replacing the broken culture. How so? Over time, the administrator has replaced wearing his or her administrator hat while at work with the wrong hat, such as the "I'm your friend" hat. This is especially true when the PMO administrator is ordained, and instead of wearing an administrator hat when required to work in that role, he incorrectly chooses to image manage under the pastoral hat. This dual role quickly becomes an obvious, untenable conflict of interest, not to mention a very confusing situation for the employees or volunteer. Are you speaking to me as my friend, my pastor, or my PMO boss? Note, any ordained person will always be perceived as ordained, So it is not that the ordained hat is ever removed. Indeed, the ordained hat cannot be removed. But clarity while communicating is paramount when an ordained person has his name written in more than one box on the org chart. You must always clearly present to the receiver you are wearing the hat that correlates to the appropriate box with your name on it on the org chart. Any receiver must always and in real time know exactly what hat you are wearing whenever you are communicating in any form. This point necessarily implies that all employees and volunteers understand the principle of hat switching, so everyone knows to whom they are communicating can vary with the circumstances and topic of conversation at any given moment. Failure to achieve this clarity for any dual role ordained person who is also working as the PMO administrator on the org chart makes for a very confused employee and volunteer. You must be true to the precise hat you are wearing and imaging in whatever you do and wherever you are communicating. For example, a true story. I sent Bill Gates via FedEx my copy of a Newsweek magazine with his photo on the cover with a Hello Bill note enclosed. I asked him to sign the magazine for me. We had met at a few Microsoft-sponsored authorized training center conferences. I also, as a convenience, included a FedEx prepaid return envelope, and he used it. Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, burned my money, not his, on postage, not only as he should have, but as he must. He must do this. Why? Internalize this point. Selecting the correct decision lens here had nothing to do with the fact that Bill Gates is the richest man in the world. The correct decision, made only if viewing the matter through the correct lens and hat switching to select the correct hat at the moment, was to of course use my money, not his, and this is precisely what he did. It is the only decision anyone animated by the correct culture and wearing the correct hat could produce. So long as you install the correct culture and wear the correct hat, there are very, very rare and few exceptions to being fully animated and guided by the invisible hand of culture and the necessity to clearly switch hats. Note how easy it would be for anyone to be confused, even disparage his decision, if either not aware of the fact that there is a hat-switching principle in the first place, or not knowing which hat was being worn when a decision was made.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.